We have all been influenced by Hollywood's visual impact, such as this scene from The Wizard of Oz. However, nothing can come close to conveying the destructive force that nature unleashed on Tupelo one Sunday afternoon in April. The death and destruction which blew through this city in only a matter of minutes has left a legacy that is still intact today, 50 years later. Hello, I'm Roy Turner, and we are going to look at how this community, like Dorothy, was forever changed. We are going to look at Tupelo before and after, and talk with some of the people who lived through the night of April 5th, 1936. The night often referred to as the night of the tornado. Tupelo was not your typical southern town. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was greeted with banners blowing in the wind over Main Street as he heralded Tupelo as the first TVA city. A progressive town by nature, people came from the surrounding area to live, work, and shop. Tupelo was home to numerous banks, retail merchants, hotels, and a thriving cotton industry. Primarily an agricultural center at a crossroads, with industry slowly replacing the plow. With industrialization came a better standard of living. Prosperity was felt throughout Tupelo's early history, right up to the time of the Great Depression. During these prosperous times, a modern hospital was constructed, as well as many government facilities, churches, schools, and homes. For the first time, it appeared that Dixie was on the rise. A diverse array of homes line the streets of the north side of town. homes sporting white-columned porticos, Queen Anne turrets, and Victorian gingerbread. On Roosevelt's visit in 1932, he had commented on the stately tree-lined boulevards and homes as he rode down Green Street. All of the beauty would prove to be ephemeral. If you tour this city today, you will find only 3 or 4 of these beautiful old homes still standing. This page in Tupelo's history was violently ripped out one spring evening over half a century ago. Yet, to the survivors of this great disaster, memories and emotions are as vivid as though it were yesterday. Listen closely now as we revisit those tragic times.
It was a Sunday, as you know, and I do remember how terribly hot and humid it was. That was before the days of air conditioning of any kind. And my husband and I asked a neighbor to go with us, and we went riding out at Tom Bigby State Park, because that was sort of new at the time, and it was something that everybody did, to ride out there and ride around.
Clouds were black and so low, and the wind was blowing terrible, and it was so hot.
Daddy came home from church. He'd been to a meeting after church, and he came in and says, I think we're going to have a storm, let's go to the basement.
He came, my wife and I were walking over the yard line. I said, look at those clouds, my Lord.
Oh, well, that day I had been to church. That was on a Sunday. And at that time, you know, in the afternoon, there was nothing so much I was doing. But it was cloudy, you know, and but blustery, very windy. And just didn't do anything much. And about night, I think this tornado came about 8 or between 8 and 9.
It was so soft, and yet it was spring, and it was supposed to be, you know, just beautiful weather, but it just was soft. You couldn't breathe real good, it didn't seem like.
It was just like weather that we're so accustomed to having here. I do remember that much about it. That close, oppressive, hard to get your breath type feeling in the air, you know.
I guess around 8:30 that night, the stillness of everything. I mean, there was not a breeze blowing anywhere, and I'm sure it was because of the barometric pressure, but it was very difficult to breathe. And a lot of people were just sitting out in the yard that night.
It happened about 9 o'clock.
When the tornado actually came over the city, when it was moving, it was very bright outside. There was so much lightning in that cloud, in that funnel cloud. It was just full of lightning. It was just flashing.
At that time, it was beginning to light, great flashes of lightning lit up the whole sky. And
Well, we was on the front porch, and the lightning was just like this.
Fire came around that section.
The whole earth was nothing but a ball of fire. And I started crying, and I said, Meg, I said, the world's coming to an end.
well, it sounded like 100 freight trains. About a few minutes before 9, we heard this noise that sounded like 5 or 6 freight trains. And then we realized something bad was happening because the house began to shake.
Sounded like 6 freight trains coming through. It really, I've never heard a roar like that before.
It sounded like a bunch of freight trains coming over. That's what it sounded like. You hear it before it hits off the floor, and you ever heard it. It's like a ball of fire when it hit Tupelo when we was going storm out.
And I said, no, this is no train this time. I said, this is a tornado.
The cold gray light of dawn was a raw awakening to the massive destruction. Half of the city lay in ruin. Muffled cries rose from piles of rubble as rescuers frantically used every means possible to free them. This city of 8,000 lay devastated. 220 people killed would be the official count, 1,200 plus injured, 3,000 homeless, 48 city blocks reduced to mere kindling. The Tupelo Daily News account read, Tornado-racked Tupelo prepared to bury almost 200 of its dead today as civilians and soldiers continued searching for more victims. Almost 200 bodies had been identified, and they lay stacked in available buildings as embalmers continued work started yesterday. Hundreds more injured when the tornado cut a path of destruction a mile wide and 4 miles long through the residential section were treated in temporary shelters here and in nearby Mississippi and Tennessee hospitals. Governor Hugh White estimated the property damage at about $8 million. It is difficult to believe that anyone in the section visited by the storm survived, he said. Between 750 and 1,000 of the town's finest houses were leveled, and the many homeless survivors were being sheltered in other residences. Scores of the injured were taken to other towns by special trains and automobiles for treatment. 91 were at Memphis, 30 others at Pontotoc, where 5 doctors were busy operating and administering aid. Others were in hospitals in Meridian, New Albany, and Amory. The blow which struck Tupelo likewise brought death and destruction to other parts of Mississippi and the nearby Arkansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. Beautiful homes were a mass of splinters, and the Negro section was leveled in many places. Not even the foundations were left to show where buildings had been. Rain and fire added to the misery of the situation. Throughout yesterday and last night, civilian conservation workers, volunteers, and National Guardsmen toiled to clear away brick and huge timbers to reach bodies of persons caught in the wreckage. Fear that today's search would send the death list above 200 was expressed by many who are directly connected with the work of looking after the dead, injured, and the dying.
And the hardware stores opened up and let people get flashlights and batteries.
And the grocery stores were open.
There were a lot of flashlights, and flashlights is the only thing I can remember. Someone had a Delco power unit, and Leroy Green Sr. and someone else had ham radios. And they're the one that got the message, I believe, outside of Tupelo and started asking for help.
I remember the National Guard coming in, and they were stationed all up and down the streets because, believe it or not, people were coming in and robbing, even taking rings off of the dead and everything. It just, it was almost unbelievable.
See, there's quite a few National Guardmen from over the state came in here. It was squally times.
Tupelo, because back in them days didn't have no way, so they were just letting people in there. 10 folks in there anyhow, they had it all blocked off.
It was pretty bad around here for a while, especially soon after the storm tornado. There was so much looting going on. Everybody's possessions were all slung all over the place, and they finally, the governor declared martial law, and they put the National Guard in here, and it stopped anyone from coming in the city or even leave. We couldn't even leave. You had to have special permits to come in or out.
The rains came. Then it began to rain real hard.
So hard you couldn't hardly see, man.
We were just in a terrible rain,
And of course, we could hear people, but we couldn't see anything because the lights and all were gone.
and then you started hearing people screaming and moaning and hollering for help,
The streets were just full of everything. If you drove your car down there, you pick up a tack or a nail, have a front puncture. You had lots of. It took a good long while.
Living rooms became hospitals as the injured began to congregate in the few remaining homes of the area. Wounds had to be cleaned and treated as best by flashlight or candlelight. Often the only sedative was a bottle of scotch.
I worked for a while that night with Dr. Cosby from CC, from Tom Bigby State Park down here. We made rounds to the Methodist Church and then up North Church Street. And we had our pockets just full of splints and bandages and what have you. And then from there, went to the courthouse, and our Feemster was there, and when I was a senior nurse that year. And he told me to take this bottle of morphine and to give it. And I told him, I said, Dr. Feemster, I've never given it without an order. And he said, you'll know. So I did, and I went from there to the city hall and worked the rest of the night. And we had a lot of people there with broken backs and things, and we put them on doors and stable, something that was stable. And they ran a special train through here and picked them up. And we sent them into Memphis, and the ambulances bring them in.
Of course, my husband was up all of that night. He was real busy. So many people hurt, and so many died. Anything that he could do, people came to the office immediately after the storm, Some of those people were in the street, and some were at houses. And as I say, people would come and get him and take him to those people if they couldn't go to the office. But he was busy all that night. and the next day and the next and on until people kind of got straight.
And I went up to the Carl Feemster home. Carl Feemster was a doctor here. And I went on and spent the rest of the night there, and I remember Dr. Feemster came in about 4 o'clock that morning, and he had just had to come home and get his clothes changed. He was soaking wet. And he said, I can't do anything for all these people. I do not have a sterile scalpel where I can operate or anything. And they were just doing what they could, and they had made the courthouse into an emergency hospital. And Oline Coffey was then superintendent of the school here for the elementary school, primary school. And she had thought to go down there because so many of the little children that were brought in knew her. And she was able to comfort them if they didn't have their own parents with them, where strangers couldn't have, you know. They recognized Miss Oline. And I know she worked there all night long with the children that they would bring in that had been hurt. But I do remember the stark horror that was obvious with Dr. Feemster when he came home to change his clothes that morning, and his anguish at not being able to help people because he didn't have the proper tools. Now, I'm told, and I think this is a fact, that they rigged, you see, this, they kind of turned the courthouse and the Lyric Theater into hospitals, and they rigged up the popcorn machine and made a sterilizer out of it. And they were able to sterilize the few instruments that they did have.
No water, no electricity. Well, sirens still haunt me when I hear them, especially if you hear 2 or 3 at a time, because that night it was just a mad screaming thing with sirens, because they came in here with ambulances from our areas. And by then they had started bringing some of these people back from Memphis that could come back closer to home and with their family. And the odor was just terrible, because we did not have the sprays and the deodorants that you have now, and some of them just had big old open wounds that you had to take care of every day, and the odor was terrific. But it was just a horrible experience to go through. We did not realize what had happened a good while after that, to be honest with you. It was so absolutely, completely devastating to stand there and have the whole house collapsing and all of the plastering from the walls, everything. And the house just more or less, you felt like you were just floating away. And I suppose probably that you go into shock because you can't comprehend it at that moment because of what's happening. I stood at the door that led out to the hall, and I saw the upstairs hall just leave like that, and you don't know what to think. You're stunned. And and then I guess you go under shock, and then you just, whatever you do, you just do. It's just something routine. You can't comprehend it all. We didn't know it at the time. We could just as easily have stepped out the front windows of the upstairs bedroom, but we didn't know that it had, we didn't know that we could do that. And so we tried to make our way down the stairs and get out that way. And when we did, of course, we ran into more problems because of, there was more there to hinder us from getting across the street. And of course, those huge trees in front of our house, we had these huge oak trees, and it was just like crawling through a jungle. I suppose sometime later that night, after we had gotten over to the Berry home, I suppose that was the first, our first thoughts was, where were they? We were really afraid that they were dead. But it was later that men began working over there at the house. They had to get a jack to jack the house up because they could hear voices, very faint voices, and they knew that the house had fallen on the members of the family. And so it was sometime later on in the night that they were able to get my father out and to bring him across the street to the very home. And I remember when they brought him that they laid him down on the front porch, and they did not give him any hope of pulling through. And of course we knew at that time that my mother and sister had been killed.
And when it started over here, the Burris family is the first that had 13 in the family. He killed them all. And they all buried over on Price in the same grave. I think it's 38 people out here in our neighborhood got killed.
And to see us that afternoon of the kill, the whole Shirley family, well, one girl was out of town, but all the rest of them came to see the new baby. Everybody was interested in the new baby. And Miss Stone across the street called that night and said she'd be over early the next morning to see the new baby, and she was killed. And on down below us was a family, a couple and their little boy were killed.
And there was Mr. Doty down here, and his son was killed. And
going over there is an empty store, and it was lined up, black folks, one right after on that floor, all the way back that way. So that's the kind of thing you see.
We were taking about, they were beginning to remove the people from the hospital, and they were trying. That's when they started scattering them around, and they started taking them to the those that had to have some type of surgery. They took them to the Lyric Theater, and they had had a little surgical unit on the stage up there. And I think possibly that's where I saw my first dead person, other than at a funeral. They were moving them over to the courthouse, I think, at that time.
I told Christine, I said, let's go to the courthouse. We go to Santa Clerk's office, and we got there, it was full of dead folks lined up on the floor in there.
You know, after the tornado and we got out and walked maybe uptown or just around, you would be so glad to see somebody that you didn't know, you really didn't know who had been killed and who was still alive. There was no way to find out. And it was always so good to see somebody who just, you just hug and
I know, man, people just, I seen more friendly people. They'd meet each other in the street that night, and they were hugging each other, glad to see each other. I know.
Seeing people who hadn't spoke to each other in years, and when they met, they're so glad to see each other, they hugged each other.
we didn't know who was alive. We didn't know what homes had been destroyed, nor anything. It was just horrible, waiting to hear. A makeshift morgue set up right down in town. And they said, would you be willing to go down there and bathe the bodies of people that have been brought in that are so terribly covered with dirt and everything before we asked their loved ones to come and identify them. And with that, my husband and my nephew, who was going to study to be a doctor, said, you can't do that. And they did it. And they worked in that morgue all that next day, bathing those bodies and getting people to look a little more presentable before loved ones came to identify.
We started walking up Gloucester Street, north on Gloucester Street, right there by Mount Junior High School. And my date warned me, said be careful and don't step on any wires. And so things were so torn up that we turned around and went back south and then walked up Jefferson Street to the corner where the library is now and started north on Madison Street. Bruce was in the middle of the street, and we'd go up one and then go down the other side. And by that time, people were beginning to come to enough and crying and calling for help. And somebody may have told you that the Presbyterian choir was practicing the Easter music.
No.
But they all hid in the room behind the organ, I think. And none of them were hurt at all, but the church was torn down, you know. Well, most of the churches were hit, and most of the schools were hit. It was right there through that part of town, you know.
Very concerned about his father. His mother lived in town at that time. They lived down on Franklin Street in the big white house that Alpha House is now in. But my grandpa was all right. In fact, his house, all the damage, was used for a hospital for a number of days until other facilities were ready.
Cross, thank you. I can just remember how they got right to work on feeding people and looking after them and everything.
Red Cross came in here and they were most active. They sent nurses in here, and of course they had, some doctors, because some of the patients had nurses, Red Cross nurses that stayed quite some time. And they had provide food and also blankets and things. So.
I believe it was sometime the next day, I believe the Red Cross came in and set up a soup kitchen or something. I got something to eat then.
To help at the kitchen. And they said, well, you stop. They were serving scrambled eggs and toast and things like that were easy to fix to people, because people just didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't know what to do or anything else. And they said, well, you start breaking eggs into these dish pans, and then they will transfer them to the big skillets. And the Red Cross had gotten in by then, and it brought some great big skillets and things. So I broke eggs until I thought I never wanted to see another egg. And I said, I just don't believe I can break any more eggs. And they said, well, you start scrambling then. So they gave me this huge skillet, and I started scrambling eggs. And I scrambled eggs till I thought I didn't want to see another egg. And about that time, they said, would anybody volunteer to take a car and run an errand for us? I held up my hand, one of the first ones. And they said, well, we'll give you a Boy Scout, because we had the National Guard in by then, and you had to get permission to go in and out. We'll give you a Boy Scout to go on your running board. That's when cars had running boards, old-fashioned running boards. And he can get you through. And I thought, well, now this is great. I'll do something for a change. And they said, would you go after Dudley Clocks and get us some cartons of eggs? I'll never eat another egg as long as I live. Well, I did work with the Red Cross for a while, issuing blankets and clothes and things to people, where they had brought in clothing and sorted it. We had friends even who had to appeal to the Red Cross for covers and clothing, whose homes were either destroyed or everything in them was wet, and they didn't have anything.
The Red Cross built lots of homes back for these folks. They were good to them, and the insurance for come out of my house and give me 100%. But a lot of them got 100%.
They had what they called a boxcar city, and they brought these boxcars in, and they were housing people and taking care of people and treating the wounded and a whole lot of things that, well, they were used for a lot of things, but they brought all them in to be used. In a lot of cases, though, to house people. And
we were, a church-going town. All during, the Depression, all the my growing up, you know, the church was sort of the center of the lives of people in Tupelo.
I was wondering why things like that happened.
And it was getting so strong, we stood there and prayed and asked the Lord to take care of us.
Let's say I fell on my knees, I don't know, I might have.
You know, God was sending a tornado maybe. However, I don't think so.
Kind of kept faith, I guess you'd say.
I said, these people that don't believe there's a Lord, they ought to go through something like that.
That caused the tornado. I do remember that Sam Howie preached that sermon, and the lyric was completely covered up. It was just filled with people. I don't remember what he said. I know a good many people said, well, he didn't really answer me, but he, you know, whether God was responsible for it or not.
Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Watch, therefore, for you know not what hour the Lord hath come.
I was wondering why things like that happened. I guess God got tired of something.
Although Reverend Sam Howie earnestly tried to persuade Tupelonians the tornado was a freak of nature and not sent from God, many felt indeed God must have got tired of something. One young blues singer, Sonny Boy Williams, shown standing on the right, placed his sentiments to music regarding Tupelo's wicked judgment.
And Tupelo, Mississippi, was a mighty, mighty simple town. Well, the people was a wicked, and anywhere else be found, they were playing, cheating and wrong. And the folks that were with their God, well, say now, I don't want to answer that. Every day one Sunday evening, just about 9 o'clock, in the cyclone fucking Tupelo, and the time began to rock. You are wind, hail, and fire. I want you to walk passing by. He just said, now, I don't want to answer that. Well, some were floating on the water, and some was sitting in there. Well, people may not believe it, but there is a God somewhere. He can wound, he can heal, he can do just as he feels. So he said, now, I don't want to answer that. Well, some was torn to pieces, and some we had to drown. Well, some were burned to ashes, and some could not be found. Well, now, I'm down an awful side. I'm out going to work at night. He just said, now, I don't want to answer the land. Well, God just sent out child, one into the land. Well, he just went out, one into the land. Well, right outside, we got all the light child to go. Boys, now, I don't want to enter the land.
When Tupelo started rebuilding, they built storm houses.
And they had no storm houses. And after that happened, many people built storm houses. And when we built this house, we put a basement, to accommodate, a storm if we had another one.
Started looking for a lot on a bank, on a hill, and he bought this lot on Goodness Street and built a garage underneath the ground that's still there, and I still feel safer there than anywhere else when there's bad weather. The house we rented, my daddy even built a storm shelter. And he built it on someone else's property. Someone else let him build it on that property, but he built one.
Built back, the first thing they did, most of them built a storm house first.
Washington started fairly soon, but I don't remember exactly when, but people started getting Red Cross to bring money in and different government loans come in to help you rebuild. And there was a mass building that took place all of a sudden, but it was a little while after the storm before it started. And of course, my dad made an awful lot of window and door frames, I guess, for houses here in town.
Carpenters came in from everywhere.
The shortage, the thing that probably accounted for the success of the boom more than anything else, they were tremendous, as is the case in all disasters like that. Tremendous influx of people come in, craftsmen of all kinds, carpenters, whatever. In fact, I really don't know whether it's true or not, but I tend to believe that if it was not absolutely true, it was close to the truth. My grandfather and father said that for the next year and a half after the tornado, that my company, which is Leakin Good Lumber Company, they averaged either building complete or restoring a house and a half per day.
After that tornado, it was hard to get lumber, to build this house. We couldn't get the best of nothing. We just had to take whatever they had because there were so many houses that you couldn't get lumber.
After that tornado hit, man, if a wind would come up, get cloudy, folk could run to the closest place they could hide. That's where they would go. Some of them used to have big sewer pipes. They go up and set up on top of them sewer pipes. Wait, everything that look see it coming. They really go in them pipes.
I know for many, many years after the tornado, people would be so frightened of lightning. And I'm telling you, I still get a nervous feeling. If I see clouds, the type cloud that could bring a tornado and the lightning and that old pinkish look back in the southwest, I get a little bit fidgety.
It's a unique thing too, these tornado shelters. I mean, that in itself, I probably have 100 photographs of those. They're folk art structures, really. They're all, for the most part, except for the new modern ones, which are fiberglass and real efficient, real good. All of the old ones are basically, I think, really interesting structures. People have just kind of made do, whether it's burying trucks or buses or building them out of concrete blocks and cover the tops with galvanized metal and then cover the whole thing with dirt. And they've been used for root cellars and all kinds of storage. And I think most people really generally felt like it was a toss-up whether they'd rather get in there with those snakes or stay out and face the tornado. But I think once that wind comes, they decide it's better in there.
Today they stand abandoned all over North Mississippi, a remnant of a long ago time. To many, a reminder of that horrible night of April 5th. To many of my generation, a memory of countless nights spent in a cold, damp hole in the dirt as our parents paid homage, showed respect for the wrath of nature. Even few of the old-timers go running through the rain in the middle of the night now. Time does have a way of healing.
Everything Today marks the 54th anniversary of the tornado that ravaged Tupelo in 1936, and thanks to the work of Roy Turner, future generations will be able to remember exactly what happened. Turner has put together a video documentary about the storm that killed over 200 people. Tonight he debuted his work at the Lee County Library. The filmmaker says the tornado was a subject just waiting to be done.
Well, I made the film because I felt the need to preserve this time of history and the importance to have the voter history before these people are gone.
That's because of the research.
It just lended itself well to the video format. In fact, it was sort of crying out.
So I think against the motion.
There was so much data. It could have been 3 hours because there was much more material than was even used.
A packed house at the Lee County Library, which included several people who witnessed the twister, were on hand for the film's premiere. County Library, which included several people who witnessed the twister, were on hand for the film's premiere.